The Forgotten Melody. In the small town of Willowbrook, life moved at a slow, peaceful pace. The town was surrounded by rolling hills, dense forests, and a quiet river that reflected the changing colors of the seasons. People there knew each other by name, and every corner of the town had a story. At the edge of the town stood an old, weathered house. It belonged to Mrs. Eleanor Crane, a woman who had lived in Willowbrook her entire life. Eleanor, now in her 70s, was known for her piano playing. Long ago, her music filled the town square during festivals and celebrations. People said her melodies had a way of reaching deep into your heart, stirring emotions you didn't even know were there. But Eleanor hadn't played in years. The piano in her living room sat covered in dust, its keys untouched. No one knew why she had stopped playing. Some said it was because of age. Others whispered that it was due to a tragedy she kept hidden. Whatever the reason, the music that once brought joy to Willowbrook had vanished, leaving behind an emptiness that no one could fill. One summer morning, 11-year-old Oliver Bennett moved to Willowbrook with his family. His parents had bought a small cafe in the town square, hoping to start a new chapter in their lives. Oliver wasn't thrilled about leaving his old school and friends, but he didn't complain. Oliver had a curious mind. He loved exploring new places and asking endless questions. One day, as he wandered through the neighborhood, he found himself in front of Mrs. Crane's house. The building looked like it belonged to another time, with ivy climbing its stone walls and flowers blooming wildly in the garden. As Oliver peeked through the gate, he heard a faint sound. It was barely audible, but it caught his attention. He leaned closer, trying to make it out. Sounded like someone humming, soft and melodic. The next day Oliver returned. This time he worked up the courage to knock on the door. After a few moments, the door creaked open and there stood Mrs. Crane. She had sharp, observant eyes and a gentle, wrinkled face. "What brings you here, young man?" she asked, her voice kind but guarded. "I heard you humming yesterday," Oliver said. "It sounded beautiful." Eleanor seemed surprised. "Did you now? Well, it's been a long time since anyone cared to listen to my humming." "I love music," Oliver said eagerly. "I play the guitar a little. Maybe you could teach me something." Eleanor chuckled. "Oh, I'm afraid my teaching days are behind me. But thank you for the compliment." Though she didn't let him inside that day, something about Oliver's honesty softened Eleanor's heart. Over the weeks, Oliver visited Eleanor often. Sometimes he brought fresh muffins from his parents' cafe. Other times he came with stories of his school and adventures. Slowly, Eleanor began to open up. One rainy afternoon, as Oliver sat on her porch, Eleanor invited him inside. The room smelled of lavender and old books. In the corner stood the piano. "You really have a piano?" Oliver asked, his eyes lighting up. "Yes," Eleanor said softly, her gaze lingering on the instrument. "I used to play every day. But that was a long time ago." "Why don't you play now?" Oliver asked. Eleanor hesitated, then shook her head. "The music stopped coming to me. Sometimes when life gives you too much to bear, even the things you love slip away." Oliver didn't fully understand, but he nodded. "Could I try playing it?" Eleanor smiled faintly. "Go ahead." Oliver sat on the bench, his fingers awkwardly pressing the keys. The notes clanged together in a mess of sound, but Eleanor didn't mind. For the first time in years, the piano wasn't silent. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the hills, Eleanor shared a story. "There was a time when I played for everyone in town," she began. "But the melody people loved the most wasn't mine. It was my husband's." "You had a husband?" Oliver asked, surprised. "Yes," Eleanor said, her voice tinged with sadness. "James. He was a composer. He wrote a melody so beautiful that people came from far and wide to hear it. We called it the Willowbrook Serenade. But after he passed away, I couldn't bear to play it anymore. It felt like losing him all over again. Oliver was silent for a moment. Then he asked, "Do you still remember the melody?" Eleanor looked at the piano, her fingers twitching as if they wanted to move. "I'm not sure," she admitted. That night, Oliver couldn't stop thinking about Eleanor's story. He decided he would help her remember the melody. At school, he searched the library for books on composing and music theory. At home, he practiced the little guitar skills he had. Though he didn't know much about music, he believed that if he could bring even a small piece of the melody back to life, it might inspire Eleanor to play again. Day by day, Oliver worked on a simple tune, something he thought might sound like the Willowbrook Serenade. When he was ready, he brought his guitar to Eleanor's house. "I made something for you," he said, his cheeks turning red. Eleanor raised an eyebrow but smiled. "Let's hear it then." Oliver played the tune, his fingers stumbling over the strings. It was far from perfect, but the effort behind it touched Eleanor deeply. "That's very sweet of you," she said. "But the melody isn't quite like that. It goes more like this." Without thinking, Eleanor moved to the piano. Slowly, hesitantly, she pressed a few keys. A soft, haunting melody filled the room. Oliver's eyes widened. "That's beautiful," he exclaimed. Eleanor stopped abruptly, her hands trembling. "I haven't played that in decades," she whispered. Encouraged by Oliver, Eleanor began playing a little more each day. She started with simple scales and songs, gradually building her confidence. Oliver became her biggest supporter, clapping enthusiastically even when she made mistakes. One crisp autumn evening, Eleanor decided to teach Oliver the Willowbrook Serenade. Together they practiced the melody, Oliver on his guitar and Eleanor on the piano. The sound of their music drifted out of the house and into the street. Neighbors stopped to listen, their hearts warming at the familiar tune they hadn't heard in years. As Christmas approached, the town planned its annual festival. Oliver convinced Eleanor to perform at the event. At first she refused, but the thought of sharing James's melody with the town again filled her with a bittersweet longing. On the night of the festival, Eleanor and Oliver took the stage. The crowd fell silent as the first notes of the Willowbrook Serenade rang out. The melody was both joyful and wistful, like a memory brought back to life. As Eleanor played, tears streamed down her face, but they were tears of healing, not sorrow. Oliver strummed his guitar beside her, his heart full of pride. When the final note faded, the crowd erupted in applause. People cheered and clapped, their faces glowing with happiness. After the festival, Eleanor's house was no longer quiet. She began giving piano lessons to children in the neighborhood, and her music once again became a part of Willowbrook's identity. As for Oliver, he found a mentor and a lifelong friend in Eleanor. The Willowbrook Serenade became their shared legacy, a reminder of how music could heal, connect, and bring joy. And so, the forgotten melody was never forgotten again.